Hi everyone. In this episode of the It's Cool to Care series, we're very excited to have a special guest with us today, Joshua Coombes. Joshua is the creator of the Do Something for Nothing movement, and you've also worked closely with Toms, right? You've done a lot to raise awareness and also encourage kindness for the homelessness community. That's why we're super excited to have you here today. I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here, guys. And like I said before, we started recording. Really love what you're doing, and happy to chat to you. So yeah, I guess for the last 5 years now, I've been going out and meeting people who are living on the streets, not just in London where I live, but also throughout different cities in the world. And that's my way of connecting, and a vehicle for that connection is a haircut. So yeah, I give haircuts to people, and spend time listening. And obviously a haircut's a great way to do that anyway. Like when I used to work in a salon, there's a part of this job where you kind of are trying to make someone, feel good on the outside, but of course you're very much there to like listen to someone and give them some time and, talk through some deeper stuff. And for me, my role as a hairdresser out being on the streets, it's it can be all kinds of things, but it's a nice way to spend that time with someone. Where rewind 5 years back, I was walking by people and wondering, what I could do, because of course, living in a big city, we see homelessness all the time. And that's how it all began for me, really, was just, I always wanted to know more about someone's story. I always felt compassionate towards this issue and these people and these lives and, these men and women I'd see, but I never really gave myself that time to really spend kind of finding out like what that was. And I felt like, I don't know, now when I think back, I think all the inner dialogue I used to have of what was the right thing to say, should I do this, should I do that? And now through going out and that first haircut, which happened 2015, it was around that time, things just started to change because it gave me this way to be able to have this conversation. And I started telling those stories with consent online, and people, sharing their stories, and other people felt the same as me. They wanted to feel more connected to this in a kind of way that was more intimate, not just like statistics in the news and the media.
Amazing. I feel like, you're so right. My greatest conversations are always with my hairdressers. You just speak for hours and you always just have really good talks. And actually, I think there's a startup in Australia, and they basically trained these barbers to be like therapists for men. So it was tackling men's mental health. And I just thought that was like such an amazing idea, because, you're there for an hour or 30 minutes or whatever, but you have good conversations and meaningful ones as well. So I just wanted to kind of start off with diving deeper into stigmas and stereotypes of homelessness. So we covered that briefly in one of our podcasts with People Project and Carden Banfield Foundation, but just on the kind of borderline of general public stereotypes. But I wanted to dive deeper into the actual kind of root cause, and basically how, substance abuse and addiction can be both a cause and result of homelessness. So I'll give kind of two different contexts for people listening. So one is someone could be abusing drugs and then struggling to perform at work, which then leads to job loss, chronic unemployment, not being able to afford housing, and then eviction, and then ending up on the streets. But at the same time, you can also have someone who's never touched drugs in their entire life and then end up losing their jobs, going through the same cycle of eviction, ending up on the streets, and then eventually start abusing and using drugs in an attempt to cope with their situation. So just tell us, I want you to tell us a bit more about, I guess, this relationship and your thoughts and kind of knowledge around it.
Definitely. And too, I'm grateful for your examples there, because I think it is important sometimes to have those thought experiments to sort of think about those two different scenarios, because let's be honest, drugs and alcohol and kind of misuse of those substances is kind of the biggest stigma surrounding this issue of homelessness. It's probably the first thing we're all going to hear when people say, oh yeah, I'm not sure whether to give people money because they might just go and spend it on this or this. And I think that in both of those scenarios, my work and how I try and educate myself on this subject is, I think, first of all, making a very clear distinction between what is recreational drug use and when somebody is is suffering from addiction. And I see it very clearly in those two scenarios, like also that there could, whether, it's like a chicken or the egg, right? Which one came first, And I know that some people might be more compassionate to the view, let's say, that someone lost their job and all kinds of events happened in their life that they couldn't help, and they ended up on the street, and then the drugs came afterwards. I mean, someone might have more compassion towards that because they think, okay, well then it's your scenario on the street that made you want to be able to kind of mask some of that pain. But to be really honest, like I have as much compassion for the like someone who's a drug user and who was suffering from addiction, and that was enough. And so the addiction was so violent that their life spiraled out of control. Yeah. So I'd say that my view and my standpoint on it is, some of us can use, we live in London. We live in a city where people go out and use drugs at the weekend recreationally. Often we live in a place where, like, depending on where you are, like these things can be a part of people's life. I'm not saying that's right, I'm not condoning it, but it's very different when there's a masking of a certain pain that I see usually, or there's a void in someone's life that someone's trying to fill with substances. And I think we can all relate to that in a lot of ways. Like a lot of us are addicted in our own lives. It might just be something that we feel like we have under control. We all pick up our phone. We all pick up our phone and forget why we've done that. We all scroll through social media for hours. Food, for me, to be honest, is quite a big one as well. I've got this person in me who wants to have a cake basically every minute of every day. But like something in me just has to go like, no, you can't do that. You can't have another cake. But it just feels really good. But I'm just like, I'm joking. But my point is, like, I'm really, really interested in us trying to see beyond this idea that, like, a bottle in someone's hand, or worse, or like, or more of a difficult image for some people is like maybe a needle in someone's arm. Like, these things, I work with people like quite regularly, where when you get to know someone, you're going to realize that this person is not doing these things to have fun. They're not doing these things to enjoy and kind of like be reckless, like, and kind of just, it's for me, I work with, the people I see on a regular basis who have these kinds of addiction issues. This is a habitual thing that's built up over many years, and a lot of the time, whether it's the before or after in that scenario you said, I just feel like to try and see beyond that is really, really important. And I think we can all relate to what's underneath a lot of the time, which is feeling pain, feeling ashamed, maybe feeling like a lack of love in your life, feeling like you've gone through, more often than not, some form of trauma. And I think that's the biggest thing for a lot of people, is a traumatic experience, or many traumatic experiences over years. So yeah, in short, like, I feel that it's important to look at this and try and remove those stigmas and dissolve them by humanizing people, and not just focusing on that as our point of kind of focus.
Yeah. And that's really interesting that you mentioned having compassion for both scenarios. So obviously, the ones where they started off with drug abuse, they could have a whole kind of scenario beforehand about what they've gone through in life, whether it's domestic abuse or like relationships with family, friends and stuff. There could be so many different reasons as to why they started, but it's just really, it's really interesting that you mentioned the both ways to have compassion, because it's so true. And I feel like a lot of people would generally lead more towards someone then falling into homelessness and then starting to use, but they don't think about why people start in the first place, and it's because they're either coping with something or
and on that point though, I think it is important to also mention though that the scenario of like being in the harsh environment of the street, like, needless to say, once you get to that point, I mean, if you're trying to get to sleep under a cold, like if you're trying to fall asleep in some doorway or under a railway bridge at night and it's the middle of winter, I mean, I personally would know I'd do anything to try and be like, how do I get through this night, not shivering cold and thinking about all of my problems? Like, I mean, I'm not having, like, I just feel that a lot of people could relate to that. A lot of people could relate to sort of like wanting anything to like try and get through the day, to try and mask like those feelings once you're in the scenario of being on the street. I think that's so harsh and that you know, the of course drugs come with that in a big way because of those factors.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of relates towards mental health and well-being as well, right? And to begin with, everyone has mental health. There's a bit of stigma around the term mental health as well, because there's positive mental health and negative. And you know, like you said, when you're out on the streets in a cold winter night, it's kind of bound to have a negative impact on your mental well-being. So I kind of also wanted to ask you, what do you think is the right kind of support that we can give people? You give your free haircuts, you have discussions with them and have a simple conversation. You know, there are also food banks and soup kitchens that support by giving out essentials and stuff. What do you think is like the right kind of support?
Actually, interesting enough, I had a meeting with a really amazing girl, Regina, who set up an organization yesterday called A Hand to Guide, and maybe someone interesting for you guys to have a chat with soon. But she's someone who is a survivor of like an abusive relationship, and her and her daughter, she was left with the prospect of going to Lambeth Council in London and having to basically, you know, the prospect of having nowhere else to go, and it was really difficult for her to even get a placement in a hostel. When she ended up in this hostel, the conditions were so dire and the place was so vulnerable that she fell into depression. And she was asked that, and she said what would have made a difference at the time. And now she set up this organization, and it's to try and create like a buddy system where when you're in that situation where you might get a hand up, to be able to have someone who's always available on the phone to talk to you 24 hours a day, you know, like someone who's always looking out for you. It might be a different person, because, you know, not everyone can be available for that long, but as far as like your story is taken on by a few different people, and then maybe you've got a few different people you can talk to. My point being though, that having that one person in there to keep your head above water, to check in with you, is really, really important. And yeah, my version of that is a haircut, and that lasts sometimes for an hour or two when I'm on the street doing this, but it can also blossom into a friendship. And, you know, a lot of people I see, I'll talk on the phone to very regularly, and you know, sometimes I spend the whole day with people, or a couple of days if I'm traveling, usually before the pandemic, in a different city. And I feel like having more of those kind of support systems in place, funded, you know, because we need, of course, like you need funding for this, and it's like there's not enough emphasis on how important this, like, you know, as you're saying, our mental health, like we're talking about this, and it's becoming more important in conversations now, but it can't just be this cool thing to talk about for like brands and companies now. And like now Prince, like William was talking about it. I mean, it's really important because this stuff does spearhead change, like making it more of a collective awareness. But we need to fast forward to like, no, this is as fundamental as having food and having shelter, you know, like having someone to talk to, having someone to share your thoughts with. It can be the difference between someone, you know, like having hope or not, and having kind of, you know, hope is sometimes your last mental buffer of like support for yourself before you lose everything. And that sometimes can lead to all kinds of consequences. And I just think, when I talk to people on a regular basis, I just know that yes, people need money, yes, people need food, yes, people need more support and more will for the government. Like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like we don't need really systemic changes like more affordable housing, and you know, that all needs to happen. But whilst we're sat here today with everybody in the position they're in, it's like it would not be difficult to just create a completely new sector for looking after like people's one-on-one mental health and well-being in the most vulnerable places, whether someone's on the street, and people are keeping more tabs on those, going back to people and having those conversations, or once they're into a hostel shelter system, which can be very vulnerable places and very isolating, to like making sure someone's okay. So I will never just from my own experience and the safekeeping of men and women I've met who live in this situation, I am already, you know, that validates for me just how important it is just having someone, you know, someone who's checking in with you. And it's what we all need, you know. It's like you said, it's like we all need that. That's not homelessness. That's not that's everybody. That's everybody. We all know what that's like when we're feeling low. We need someone to talk to, and it's, you know, the more we can, that's why the mental health conversation is really important, because the more we can dissolve the stigmas around that, perhaps the more we can understand all these things we're talking about, like, you know, isolation and what might lead to drug addiction and all of these kind of issues we're faced with in homelessness. I think it actually echoed out through society. It's just that when you see someone who's living in these really harsh conditions, it's the sharp end of all those things that I think we all experience, but they're out there for everyone to see. I don't want to talk too much before you ask another question, but one thing I just thought of then is, it's an important thing to mention, is that when you're seeing someone who's living on the street, you get to see all of their life because it's on display. Like, if someone could see how, you know, my life at home, like, maybe it's not always that pretty. Like, there are times you feel stressed, there are times you feel angry, there are times you feel frustrated, you know, but like, I get the privilege of being able to like close the door on the world and like deal with that myself. Just somebody who's out there living their life in the open, it's like, God, that's like, there's no escape. You can't shut the door on the world. You can't pretend it's all okay. Sometimes you get angry, sometimes you get annoyed, sometimes you're ungrateful for everything in this world, and then you hopefully come around again. But it's like, that's all played out in front of us, you know, and that's, I have a lot of empathy for that, really.
Yeah, definitely. I think I forgot to share statistics about how 86% of the homelessness population reported having a mental health difficulty. And but I also wanted to emphasize, you know, what you said about how everyone goes through this, and especially after coming out of the pandemic, I feel like, you know, being in lockdown as well, and some people being in isolation, I think people are becoming more and more aware of the fact that you need a bit of socializing in order to kind of have, you know, go on about your day. Like, we were so used to seeing people on a regular basis without having to worry about things, and then, you know, all of a sudden we were in lockdown, just shut in our own rooms. And I think through that as well, I like a lot more people are becoming more conscious of the fact that it's important to be able to have a conversation with people, and especially, you know, those on the streets as well. Like, we've heard many stories about how they feel kind of invisible, and like, you know, their identity is not there anymore because so many people walk past them without even a hello. So I think it's just like small things that are kind of crucial to not only like making someone's day, but also like making sure that they feel acknowledged and recognized and accepted in society as well. So
and turning sympathy into empathy. Sympathy is one of the most useless emotions we can feel for another human being. I mean, you know, I don't want someone to feel sorry for me. I don't want pity, you know, it doesn't help me. And I want someone to try and understand what it is I might be going through. And clearly, when someone's living in a very different circumstance than me, and clearly, like, their life, at least from the outside, may look very different because, you know, they're sleeping outside and I have a home. It's like, you can still go there. You can still try and go there and go like, no, what would it actually be like for me to be out here? Like, I'd still have all my own thoughts, my feelings, my hopes, my dreams. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make is, and I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, you know, myself included, I have to check myself, is like, you kind of forget someone's got this whole identity and this whole life. We group people into, you know, categories. And, you know, like, I remember this guy I met in Manchester once, and he was reading a book, and he said, I've been reading my book a lot at the moment, and so sometimes people come up to him and they said, oh, I'm surprised you're reading. And he was like, why are you surprised I'm reading? And he was like, they couldn't really, they realized as they said it, they went, oh yeah, why am I surprised you're reading? It's like, it could be that you're homeless and I didn't think you'd be into that. Like, what, still reading a book? Like, or like, maybe I don't know what, I'm not going to go there with what but it's so, you know, it's so demoralizing in some way. It's like, I meet people who, you know, they still like music, they still like books, they still like movies, you know, they live this whole life. And I just know that it's this, you know, it's this assumption we make, and it's okay to just recognize it, sit with it and go, God, yeah, okay, I just, you know, this thing is it's confronting us all the time, but it's not. I can't just be homelessness. I always try and word it a person experiencing homelessness as a transient state, you know, rather than a homeless person, because like it's not someone's identity. And even if you're going to meet somebody who wants to live in that way and wants to, like, you know, has like that, you know, I've met, you know, people before who are just like, yeah, this is how I want to live right now, and I'm like, that's totally cool. But you know, it's still the state of whether they have a house or not is not what defines them as a human being, you know. And it's quite a fun thing to think about sometimes too, when you're, you know, I often when I give talks, I try and set up this kind of this analogy of, you know, people say things like, oh yeah, I tried to help somebody once, somebody who's experiencing homelessness, and I tried to give them something and they threw it back in my face and they're really ungrateful, so like I'm never going to do that again. That's like, you know, from that one experience, it's really, you know, this really wide brush now has been painted across everybody else who you know, who's living in the same situation. And I say, how illogical is that? How illogical is that? Imagine if you applied that same thought process to somebody who has a home. So like anyone who's rude and then aggressive to you at any point in your life and you have a bad interaction with, imagine waking up the next day and going, right, that's it. Anyone with a house, I'm done with it. There. No, I'm no longer speaking to anybody who has a roof over their head each night. And I know it's like, it seems a bit silly, but it's fun to think about things like that sometimes, to be like, oh yeah, like that's crazy. That's crazy. Like the idea of one experience with somebody. I always say, I'm just like, look, it doesn't matter if you've had a bad experience with someone. It doesn't matter what they look like. It's like, just try and keep it isolated to that moment. You know, that was them. They were there, that person at that time. And, you know, it's just, it's not easy to do sometimes, but I have to keep checking myself to make sure I do the same.
Yeah, no, same here. I mean, we're all learning every day. And I think you're so right. There's definitely an artificial divide between, you know, not normal people, but like us and how we view people experiencing homelessness. And you're so right about people thinking, oh, like, why are they reading? But we actually have, like, we mentioned this in one of our podcasts, but we spent like 15 minutes talking to this guy about one book, and it was a book about how to win. It was like How to Win Friends or something. It was like a popular, like,
I know which one you mean.
You know, yeah, it was like one of the top 10 books, and he was like telling us about his theory and how he really loved that book and stuff like that. And I think automatically people would assume like, oh, but it's so recent, you know, like how do you know about it? And it's like, he's not living in a different world. And they've all had, you know, they all can have normal conversations and stuff. So you're so right. And I think definitely a huge gap between, you know, us and how we perceive people experiencing homelessness, which definitely needs to be bridged in terms of how we support them or how we connect with them, because at the end of the day, they're just normal people. So
yeah. And maybe that is, excuse me, maybe that is our job, you know? I mean, a lot of the stuff is like, can't expect, you know, people walking into Westminster every day to be that connected with everyday life and one another. Like a lot of this stuff is street level, and it is our job to try and go, oh yeah, we've got to see past the way we interact with one another, because it's no wonder people who are in charge of the bills of reducing homelessness and all this stuff don't know what they're doing. I mean, it's like, I'm not having a go, but I'm just saying, it's like they're in that mad looking hundreds years old oak wood. Like when you look at Parliament sometimes, don't you think it's all a bit silly? You're like, of course you don't get what's going on in the outside world. Look at this place you're in each day. I mean, I just feel that like, and they're busy. Politicians are really busy. They're not out on the street all the time doing this stuff. So some of this stuff isn't really important for us to just work through these stigmas, work through these ways we interact with one another. That's why we do something for nothing. Like whenever I post like about someone's story, I always use that hashtag, and I did from the beginning, because the idea was like, you know, and we can all if like everyone walks out into this world each day with a different ethos and a different kind of mentality, that change is real, and it's very real on an individual level. Because no matter how much you want to walk out and not see homelessness in your city or not see people struggling and suffering, that's not something you can personally change overnight. You can change over time, and collective effort can change over time, but your personal change, I think, is actually more important. And that's what I try and I try and sort of promote with this message, and what comes with the work that I do is like, what's your version of this? Like, you know, like I talk to people in different cities who are doing great things, and it's cool. It's cool. You can find a bit of a network on social media that, you know, I know there's a lot of negativity there as well, but I find it quite a positive place most of the time for me, depending on the conversation you're having.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, definitely. And I guess okay, so we touched on a bit about, you know, soup kitchens earlier, and so there's this ongoing debate about how soup kitchens, charities that donate clothes, toiletries, or any kind of support along the lines of giving something for free enables homelessness and almost sustains people in living on the streets. And it's also said that, you know, distributing free food, hot drinks and stuff and clothing creates a dependency on handouts, which does little to help people off the streets. So that's a kind of criticism, I guess, of these organizations that, you know, and I think to some extent I understand, but there are also no studies that show a clear link between people sleeping rough and operating organizations and soup kitchens. And I'll give you an example. So basically we have a partner shelter that we worked with, and there was this guy who was living there for a couple of years, and he was ready. He was in that kind of transition stage from being at a homeless shelter to being ready to kind of get back on his feet, be put in housing and start looking for a job. But they were saying how he's very hesitant and kind of worried to go back on, because he kind of built like a family and a community in the homeless shelter and on the streets, because he had that kind of human connection with people. And he was just worried that when he did move into a house, he would kind of lose that, because he had no real friends in the real world, or no family or just anything. So he would just basically be back to square one without, I guess, his community. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to get your kind of thoughts on this debate about charities and soup kitchens and stuff enabling homelessness.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point of conversation. I feel to that scenario of someone not wanting to leave a community they have and go into a home, I completely relate to that. You know, I mean, and that individual like experience of being one in a building, of not knowing people or wherever you're put in a housing, it's like, you know, why would you want to swap that for leaving like a place where you feel like you've got a little support network and family? You know, that can look very different for everyone. And again, that's you know, I won't go too far down that point, but that's another interesting conversation about like, you know, we live in this huge city, but living these individual lives where you can go a whole day without talking to someone sometimes. And, you know, then there's that conversation of whether you have a roof over your head or not. God, you know, you'd swap some of that for those basic human connections that we need, you know. But on the debate of so people doing certain things to enable people to stay where they're at, I feel that I take that point on board, and I know where it's probably coming from, and I hope it's coming from a good place. But honestly, I think it's a laugh, because, you know, again, what I said, the people who are really in charge of making the change here, the actual will to get people into houses, to provide better support, to wake up to the fact there's so many people suffering in a city that has so much and is so prosperous economically. It's like that conversation, I don't think sparks change. I think people are out on the street and it's like, you know, okay, sleeping bags, food, we'll keep giving you, even if you serve people up a five-course tasting menu each day. I really don't think it takes away from the reality that like a lot of people don't make it through the winter. A lot of people have chronic health issues from living on the street. I've met people who within a few years of living on the street, their health's deteriorated so much. So, you know, you can make it as good as you can and patch it up as best as you can with like all the freebies, but I still don't think it's like enough to like really put someone in a place where like, oh, this is pretty good. I'm actually just going to chill here for a while. Like I'm loving this, you know? And I mean, and even if they are, that's cool. But like, I think it's not a conversation for me that I think is going to push things forward. I think it's more important that we all work together and go, look, if you feel compassionate about giving these super amazing sleeping bags that are going to keep people warm and serving people the best shit hot food, amazing. Because whilst they're here in this situation, which let's be honest, we can all agree isn't the Ritz, like keep doing it. But you know, if someone's on the other side of that fence saying, well, hey, I think what I'm interested in here is like real innovative, creative, new ideas to try and like actually sort of, you know, like transition people from this place they're in mentally to be able to be ready to get off the street, great. You know, everyone's going to have a different passion in this, and I think if you're passionate about helping people, we're on the same team. And I think if you get you know, if you're if you're engaged in people and you actually really want to go out and kind of like be of service to people in your community, like I don't see any need for competition in that. But you're right, it's not. I'm not to say it doesn't exist, because I know that debate's happening, and I think it's important to mention. But I just feel like, look, let's learn from each other. Like, nobody's right in this thing. Nobody is. Like, and to think you're right is like, it's a problem, because you've closed doors. Then, like, I'm doing what I can do. I give a haircut, it grows out after a few months. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that's like in the act of a haircut going to change the world, but I'm learning and I'm trying my best to understand with each person that I meet. And I need everybody, because I can't talk to someone when I'm giving them a haircut and go, oh, by the way, I've also got this like shelter you can go to, and I've also got this like rehabilitation center you can go to help with your issues and all that stuff. So we all need each other. And yeah, to finish that point off, I'd just say that, you know, I want people to have, I want to live in a place where people are like getting served like great stuff and given great kind of help whilst they're in a difficult position, because you know, that's for me just something that I want my money that I pay my taxes to like go to that kind of stuff. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, and you know, soup kitchens and organizations and people who give out like free sleeping bags, socks,
yeah,
clothing and stuff undoubtedly play a role in kind of reducing food poverty and also reducing, you know, incidences of survivalist crime, because you get a lot of situations where people are sleeping on the streets and then people steal bags, food, shoes, anything to kind of, it's a battle of survival. So I think, you know, having these organizations in place not only lends a hand to people in need, but also provides them with that support. And it goes back to the human connection, you know, them feeling a sense of belonging and feeling like people actually care. If we didn't have any food or essentials in place, they'd be on the streets really, really lonely and feel like there's no hope or worth or whatever. So I think having these organizations are actually really important. And I think the debate, I understand, like you said, where it's coming from, but I think it's slightly absurd. But
But I'd love to put it to you guys, because I mean, look, do you feel that when you go out and you give someone a new pair of socks, or you're helping them out and you know, with a hat or with something to keep warm, like, I mean, do you feel that that's the main focus of what it is that you guys do?
It's so interesting. We talk about this every day. I mean, I feel like, you know, truthfully, we do ask ourselves every day, like, is a pair of socks really going to make a difference? But then we go out and we do outreaches, and I think it validates what we're doing, because we go out, yesterday we did an outreach, we had socks, chocolates, boxes and stuff, and the socks and chocolates were actually so popular. And I think we almost take for granted the very simple things in life. We don't think about our feet get us from destination A to B. Our foot, sorry, we get, you know, it gets us from one place to another. And if someone's walking 7 miles a day, you know, their socks are going to wear off, their shoes are going to break. We see so many people. Yesterday we saw a guy he had size 11 feet, but he was wearing size 10 shoes, and he opened his shoes up so it looked like slippers, and he was wearing no socks. And as soon as he saw our socks, he was like, please. And we gave him a couple, because it's just, you know, it's just little things like that. And I think at the back of our heads, we're like, oh, like, you know, maybe socks might not be a huge essential, but it's every little essential put together that does make a huge difference. And, you know, we see it, and we want to show more of it, because it's just, you know, they talk about their socks having holes. A lot of them have cuts on their feet. Their feet are like so dirty. Most of them actually change their socks in front of us, because they're like, oh, thank you. And they, you know, put it on. So, and
then just put them straight on. That's honestly, and I just see from where I'm standing as well. I just see, if I'm there and you guys come up, I'm like, you guys are also the face behind that. And it's like, you know, anything that you do, that debate that we're talking about, it just focuses on the material side of things. And it's like, again, that's not it. Like, whatever you do, you guys, you're there, you have the conversation, you listen to people, you're making, you know, you're bothering, you're spending some time. So all of these things for me, like, they're all essential items. Like, as far as like, some are more essential than others, like, you know, certain things you might want over other things, but they're all a vehicle for this other really important essential item, which we're talking about here, which is like our mental health and our feeling like there's somebody in there who's kind of checking in with me in a genuine way, and like, oh, you just came to where I'm sat, which I also think is an important part of this too, which is like the outreach side of it is important, because some people going into a shelter, you know, speak a bit about like pride and stuff sometimes on like that side of things, because, you know, constantly going in and having to feel like this charity case, you know, it's not all that, you know, I can't imagine it'd be, after a while, it would be a really strange feeling, like always feeling like you always need a handout. Whereas when you're sat somewhere and someone comes over to you, it's a different interaction than if you're going into a center and queuing up constantly for this thing and this thing. So yeah, it's important to have everyone doing their thing. And for me, I just hope that a lot of this stuff, when there's time, can foster that connection that we're saying, can actually provide more than just the item itself.
Yeah, definitely. And actually it's amazing to see. And even like chocolates for us, we didn't realize how many people, like, I think chocolates were the most popular item yesterday. Everyone was like,
I like
nobody said no.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's just
I was going to say, who says no to chocolate? Like,
I'm not a huge fan of chocolate, but
no, the thing is, don't get me wrong, I'm into it. Like, I have to, like I said to you, I know when to eat and when not now, but it's like I used to be really bad, you know, those big bars of dairy milk, like even one person's not supposed to eat one of them in an evening. I used to eat so much that I was like, I'm going to be the guy who has to get taken to hospital because of chocolate afterwards. I've managed to get it down to like a reasonable, manageable level now.
Yeah,
it's so good.
Yeah, I've never been a huge fan of chocolate. I don't know why. I do eat it, but just I would never crave. Actually, no, I have. Maybe like once every 3 months, I'm like, I fancy a bar of chocolate. But
that's
on the streets, it's just it's just, I guess it's like a comfort food, you know. It's just, when we said chocolate, people were like, yes, you know, it's like a shocking.
Someone said no to socks, even to hot water bottles, to meals, and then we said, what about a chocolate? It's like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe a chocolate.
Yeah, you've got my attention now. Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, but you know, we've all got that thing. I'm like that with some people. For me, I know what you mean if you don't like chocolate, actually, because I'm like that with sweets. Like, I never understood the chewy sweets, the Haribo and all that. I'm like,
I like the Haribo chewy. I love gummy, but chocolate.
Really? Oh, that I'm like, what's this? Is this like
flavor? You've got like strawberry, like coconut. So much more flavor.
Really? Honestly, I feel like they're just sort of like, are these like some toys someone's left around? Like, this is just not even food. It's like, yeah. But anyway, I feel like the you know, what the chocolate side is mad. I tell you what, one of the biggest squirrels I've ever seen just came past our window. I'm talking like giant. I feel like this stuff though is like, you know, even if I offer haircuts, and I know that sometimes people say yes and sometimes people say no, and that's great, but I don't know if you guys find also that the more you go back to someone, like there's been times where after a few times I haven't, you know, someone said, like, actually, no, I'm good, I'm fine. But then after a few times, someone has opened up, said, oh yeah, actually, maybe I'm ready for that today, I'll do that. And I know items, it's a little bit different, but I just feel like you must find as well with the work you do that initial interaction is the first of building trust with somebody, and you've got to really build that trust to actually get underneath and you know, have a proper conversation. Like the amount of times that like it's taken a few times me going back to sort of see someone before someone really opens up, because they're used to, you know, a lot of the time it might be based on like the fact that they're used to people letting them down, or like, you know, that thing's so important. Trust is everything. It's like being in a relationship, you know, until you've got there, you know, it's hard really. There's not really a foundation. And when I've gone back more times, and I'm sure you guys have too as well, and you build trust, it's like, it's a really important part of this thing that I think is overlooked too as well. You're not just coming around with your clipboard and you're just some stranger. It's just, you know, you're a person, and it takes a while. And yeah, it's just like, it's not easy. It does take time, some of the stuff. Like, you've got to be willing to like go back and go back again. And then sometimes that's when it can come good.
Yeah, we actually recognize, and we've built good relationships with a lot of people out on the streets now, because we go to the same places every time. And actually there was this one gentleman that he'd been on the streets for a couple of years, and we actually started off. And actually, before I go into that, like, the trust is a huge issue, because before they go into homelessness anyway, I think their trust has kind of been, I guess, just not
bad experiences.
Yeah, to put it that way. Yeah, so from previous experiences in their lives, or whatever's been going on, and especially people just walking past them on the street, or maybe friends on the street might use them for something and then end up stealing their stuff. So I think, trust for them is huge. And
sure.
There's this one guy that we met, and it started off a bit rocky. There was a huge misunderstanding from our side and his side, but we met him yesterday again, and we've seen him a few times after, and it's just been a whole new relationship now. And we're speaking to him, he's messaging us on Twitter. We're going to be helping him and his friend on the street as well to find like an interpreter. But it's just one of those things where, even if there's a misunderstanding, there's still kind of ways to fix it. And I think really building that trust and making sure that they see you regularly, they know what you're doing and what your purpose is and why you're helping, then I feel like that makes a huge difference. Because at the end of the day, like I said, I just keep going back, but trust is huge.
Yeah, for sure. Honestly makes a lot of sense, and that doesn't have to be some overwhelming thing on an individual level. It can just be that one person you see. I mean, I think also it's really important to mention, like, we can't do everything. Like, we can't, it's okay. Like, I always try and, it's hard not to get overwhelmed by all the problems we face in the world, right? And it's like hard not to get overwhelmed when you're sat at home and you're just reading about them and scrolling, and kind of, it doesn't half leave you with like a feeling of, I don't know, how the hell can I do something as one person? But that's not for me anyway, that's not my mission. It is about one person. It's about, if you can get to know that one person near you, in the scenario we're talking about, particularly with homelessness, who's like somebody who's sat outside your tube station or outside your shop, and, like, as you said, go back and see them again and again. And it's like, that's cool. You've got a busy life too. You might have kids you're bringing up. You might have, obviously a job you're going to. Rents cost a lot of money in London. Like, so many people on a thin line, especially with the pandemic now, who are like, it is a struggle. Like, we've all got our own issues and our own problems, but it's not about thinking, how can I do something? There's all these problems, I'm going to get on my own stuff. It's like, you can just be available for like that one person. And I think it's really, really important to have those kind of relationships in your life. Like, I'm grateful for my friends and my family and my girlfriend and that amazing support network that I have within my immediate circle. But there's always something in me that needs to, like, go beyond that and get to know people who are like strangers who are walking this earth too, and sharing our problems, sharing our kind of, our time. I think there's something about, it's hard to actually articulate. There's something about that kind of relationship it's very important for me to have in my life. Like, whatever I'm doing in the future, like I'm cutting hair or doing this thing or doing that thing, I'm like, I always want to be just trying to find those other relationships beyond my immediate circle, where I can maybe interact with people in a way that, I think it's just really important for all of us to have. I don't know quite what it is, but I'm sure that they really feed me, those relationships, and I need to be out there and be giving myself beyond my immediate circle as well.
Yeah, the feeling is slightly indescribable. I can't even describe it either, but I completely understand. As soon as you were describing it, I was like, it's the same feeling whenever we go out and help. And even before Leho, like, every time I did any work with volunteering or working with, people in need, it's just that different level of connection. It's so hard to describe, but it's just so, like, genuine. I
think we all, depending on what your life is like, we all want that in some ways. People are looking for that a lot of the time when they go out to a bar, on a Saturday night. I mean, I know obviously it's fueled with like maybe some other intentions there, but my point is, like, you've got people all over the place, all over the time, looking for those kind of connections. But sometimes, a lot of the time, it's harder to sometimes, in the sober light of day, just walk up to another person and be like, hey, what's up? How are you? Like, I know that's not easy sometimes, but it's not as hard as you think either. Like, it's not. And sometimes it's about playing out the worst case scenario. I say to people who, ask questions like, oh, how do you approach somebody? And, what if someone reacts badly to you? When we're talking about people experiencing homelessness specifically, and I'm like, look, what's the worst case scenario? Like, if, and this is if you want to, by the way, all of this is a very healthy dose. Anyone watching this, you know, when you put it out there, it's like, this is all like, also just eat pizza and watch movies and have a good time. I'm not here to tell anyone to like how to live their life. Like, but it's like, if you are walking around thinking, oh God, I just want to interact with this thing, but I don't know how, the best advice I always give is like, you know, worst case scenario, if you go up and walk up to somebody who's looking like they're in a bad situation, and you know, it's the middle of London and someone's clearly sleeping on the streets, like, even if someone tells you to go away and says it in like a worse tone with worse language, it's like, in hundreds of haircuts I've given and conversations I've had to initiate those haircuts from going out in different cities around the world, it's like, no one's been violent towards me, no one's lashed out at me. Like, yes, I've had some energy sometimes, I'm not going to like lie, like, but it's like, okay, cool, you're good, you don't want to talk to me right now, that's cool, I'm going to get on my merry way. But then it's like, what do I do with that feeling? Do I go, oh, maybe, yeah, you just got to get thicker skin and be like, yeah, cool, that's cool, you don't want to talk to me, like, I don't want to talk to people, like I said to you earlier, like without, before I've had like a coffee in the morning, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like, we can all relate to that, and we just you know, yeah, I just think that, what's the worst case scenario if you're in the middle of a busy city, it's during the day, I'm not saying go try and chat to people down a dark alley in the middle of the night, and just like, you know, someone tells you to go away, cool, that's as far as it, just leave that experience where it happened in that moment.
Yeah. Your attitude and how you respond to it, really being like,
exactly,
quite weary of it. Yeah, but
that's true. Exactly.
Okay, so I think, you know, we've covered quite a lot of interesting topics. Just to wrap up a little bit, I wanted to touch on the do something for nothing movement as well. I kind of stalked your Instagram and I saw that your book is coming out very soon in May, right? So if you want to share a little bit about that, how, you know, the inspiration behind it and stuff. So.
For sure, yeah, no, I appreciate being able to share it, because it's a really good way to get like more of an insight into the work that I do, and you know, the book is a series of images and stories of people I've met and cut hair for in cities throughout the world, from UK and Europe to America, India, Australia, some other places, and it's kind of you know, I've been out of my backpack doing this for 4 or 5 years now, and it felt like a really important document to have in a tangible way. Social media is brilliant to be able to communicate these messages in, you know, a kind of responsive, sort of, you know, quite quick way to get people involved in something. But I just thought it was really important as a document to sort of have this. So yeah, the book, as I got here, I'm gonna shamelessly get it out. It's like, so basically, this is like, this book is the UK cover, and it's being published on May 27th. So yeah, this is like a really cool way to support as well, because it's a not-for-profit book in the sense that the publishers are covering their costs and they're donating like £1 per sale, but any proceeds that I get from so they'll all be going towards future not-for-profit art shows. So me and my friend Jamie Morrison, he's a visual artist in London, and we've put on, before the pandemic, we were doing art shows in different cities where he'd paint portraits of people that would meet and would sell the art and auction it off to try and raise money for a local NGO. And we'd work with local artists, sometimes featuring homeless men and women, so like people who are experiencing homelessness and their work. So yeah, it's very kind of, it's a cool way to not only have hopefully more of an insight into this issue and a lot of stories and the themes that run underneath those stories, you know, that we can all relate to, but also to support like people in that position. So yeah, it's published on May 27th, but you can pre-order as well. Like if you go to my Instagram and go through the link in my bio, there's all that stuff there.
I will definitely pre-order. It sounds amazing. I love the idea of it. Honestly, it reminds me
as well. So.
Yeah. I was going to say, it reminds me a bit about the Humans of New York, which is what we talked about, you know, and it's just, I just love it. It's so good. And, you know, the fact that you've been traveling and getting those stories yourself just makes it more authentic, I guess. And it's just,
yeah, you know, the process was really interesting, because I just, yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm looking forward to. The people who've got it so far, I'm really happy. Like, you know, people around me, it seems to, it's just, I just know I wanted to produce something that I want to be a conduit for the people I've met. My friend Levine in there, like I showed her, so she was on the street at the time and her story's here, and I went to see her the other day and gave her copy of the book, and being there and seeing her read that, I was like, okay, as long as you as long as you think it's cool, I'm good. You know what I mean? Everyone else can shit on it, but I'm like, yeah.
Obviously, I saw that video. Yeah, that almost made me tear up. That was really, really sweet, and she must have felt so like happy.
Yeah, but it's really, you know, it's so. I just want to be able to. For me, a lot of people have a voice. I'm only trying to. I suppose, of course, you have a creative version of how you see things in this world, and this book is that for me. Like I'm in there to express these things, but yeah, I mean, a lot of the work I do, this stuff is just to try and people have already got a voice. It's just about creating more visibility and more of an amplifier for that. God, you know, I learn so much from the people I meet, the best people I meet, like the best interactions I have. You know, so yeah, I'm hoping that people resonate with the pages.
Yeah, and I think just the phrase as well, "do something for nothing," is just very inspirational, because you know when you're not expecting anything in return and you're genuinely doing something for somebody, I think that's kind of the best way to help in a way.
Totally, and it's kind of sneaky too, because the truth is you really do get something, you know, like which is like you don't, but then you do because like
you're good.
It's the intrinsic kind of
exactly. Yeah, it's your own. It's having a conversation for you as well is part. You know, it's therapy also, and that's not the intention why you go out and do it, but it's like the knock-on effect is that you do, you take something out of it too. It's a symbiotic thing. It's not just, you know, it's not just helping one person. It's being involved and participating yourself, which of course gives you something.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, thank you so much. This was really, really. I love
you guys.
And I love everything that you do. Really excited to get your book. I think I'll probably like cry, but well, that's a good thing. It'll be a good cry. Happy tears.
Right. Well, that's it. Yeah. Well, I'm happy. Honestly, you guys. Thanks for supporting this, and thanks for doing what you do and having this conversation. Like it's an important one. I think for all of us, it's an important one to keep having these conversations and joining kind of like our ideas together to push for kind of, I guess, like this collective change as far as we I can tell want on like this kind of street level of like how we interact each day. So I'm very grateful for you guys and what you do, and yeah, let's chat more soon.
Yeah.